Hi, good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the round table that we've planned in conjunction with From the Ground Up, the Renwick Craft Invitational 2007. If you haven't had a chance to see the exhibition, please come over to the Renwick later on this afternoon or tomorrow. It opened March 9th, and we had a wonderful opening last night where we had many of the lenders and supporters who were willing to part with the works for the exhibition, and it was a great opportunity to bring all four women in. I mentioned last night, it's kind of funny, March happens to be Women's Month and Craft Month, so I can't think of a better time for us to have an exhibition that features the work of four amazing women who work in craft materials. The exhibition will be on view through July 22nd, and we have a number of programs planned, including this one. Wow, that is going to be hard with that hammering away. Well, it's sort of that craft in process. It's really a great opportunity to have the four artists here to share their insights and talk about their work. And I'm also delighted that aside from the four artists, Susanne Frantz, who was a juror along with Lloyd Herman, our founding director of the Renwick Gallery, helped to select the four artists for this exhibition. And after the artists talk about their work, Susanne and I are going to quiz them. No grades. We're just going to also continue to learn. As Susanne said, we were trying to come up with questions for the artist, and I think Susanne hit the best one, which is, what do you want people to walk away with when they see your work? So that's the one question I'm throwing out early. I'd also like to thank the Smithsonian Women's Committee. Without their support and a grant which allows us to do contemporary craft seminars and lecture series, we had one 2 years ago, and they were generous enough to sponsor that, and I see them in the crowd, so I'd really like to give a round of applause and thank the Women's Committee for bringing these four artists back. Finally, I'd like to also thank Rebecca Robinson, who is my assistant and has really tirelessly worked on the PowerPoints and with the artists and worked very hard and behind the scenes. So, Rebecca, I know you're out there. Thank you so much. So without further ado, I'm going to let each of the artists come up and talk, and at the end, Susanne and I will start off with some questions, and then we'd like to turn it over to you because I think it's great when you have a chance to actually see their work, their earlier work, and their current work. So I'm going to invite Paula Bartron to come up and start us off.
I'd like to say I'm honored to be here and to be asked to be part of the exhibition, and I want to thank Jane and Rebecca especially very much, and Susanne Frantz. And I'd like to say a little bit about myself. I'm from California, from the Bay Area, and I studied glass with Marvin Lepofsky and ceramics with Peter Volkas and Ron Nagel. I left the U.S. in 1972, a couple of weeks before the Watergate break-in, and Vietnam was going, and it seems like politics today isn't much different. But I wanted to go to Europe and travel. I had a small grant because I wanted to see all the stuff I had learned about in school, art history things, and also to learn more about glass, because in Europe there was a long tradition. And I traveled around for, like everybody, the old hippies in those days, I hitchhiked through 20 countries or more, from a one-way ticket to London to Israel and back, and finally ended up in Sweden and went to a trade school at the Orrefors factory to learn more about blowing, because at that time, in the studio glass movement, nobody blew glass very well. It was just, we looked in books and tried to figure out how to do it, and they knew how to do it, so I went to that, and I was interested in design. And then I also lived in Finland for about a year as an apprentice to Kai Frank and Oiva Toika. And then after that, I came back to Sweden, and they were looking for somebody to start a studio glass program, and they had factory people there, but nobody who knew how to do studio glass. And now I'm going to start this. I hope it was F5. Mm-hmm. Huh. Oh, wait. This is my first time doing PowerPoint, so it's sort of shaky. Let's see. And oh, nay, that's not
now
right.
F5.
Yeah, but they're not in the beginning.
They're not in the beginning.
Well, here, maybe it will.
Here, I'll go right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got to this school in Stockholm, Konstfack, and there was an empty room. And to build a small furnace, so I built the typical studio glass small furnace that held about 100 pounds or a little bit more than 100 pounds of glass. And we had that studio, I built it for almost no money at all, less than $2,000. And we had it for 7 years. And this is the first workshop we had with Dale Chihuly. That's the spring of '76. And that's when he was still blowing, so I assisted in blowing. And the second workshop we had was in the fall of '76, and that's Spertovolin sand casting. And then now I'm going to show my own work. That's enough of ancient history. And let's see. Yeah, my work is, at the time, it's these pieces I started at the end of the first 7 years of that first glass workshop. Now we're on our third one, but I blew lots of plates, and I wanted to use them like paper to make compositions. And at the time, I was interested in suprematism and constructivism and the Peking opera and sushi, which was just beginning to be eaten, and over in the West. And so I made pieces like this that were compositions of slumped and sandblasted parts that were glued on, and you can see. And I was interested in lines and planes, and made also brush strokes. I've always been interested in an Oriental kind of Japanese influence of the signs you get from brush strokes. So I made a series of bowls and plates with brush strokes it's an underlay with sandblasted pattern. And more lines, sandblasted series of plates with holes and lines in different ways and shadows. And then I was invited to an exhibition at Lunds Konsthall in southern Sweden, and they were interested that we would work in a more experimental way. And I'd been to Documenta, and I was influenced by the installations. And so this work, there's 2 floor installations. The one in the front called Hav, or Sea, and it had to do with nature and I have a list here. Nature and also minimalist lines and planes and putting things in a grid pattern. And so it looks like the sea of rippling water. And here's another detail of it. They're all 12 by 12 centimeters and 12 centimeters in between the rows, and it's about 3.5 by 4.5 meters. And then this other one was called Lines and Planes, and it's birch logs on about a ton of sand laid out on the floor, and it's like water flowing over in a stream of birch logs. So this one really had to do with kind of Swedish nature. And then there came a period of time where we were rebuilding our new studio, and it had gone a long time before I got a lot of work done, and I started sand casting. And so I wanted to make things that were rough, but in a way austere and elegant in a certain way, and having kind of references to old, used, worn surfaces and ancient tools and stuff. And so I started making these, which are sort of like slugs or snakes. And one thing with sand casting, you always get a back. And so like on the red one there, it weighed about 20 pounds, and I carved about 2 pounds off of it to get it into the round, and it's sort of a matte polish. And then I'm interested in construction and buildings, so I made a box. I started making boxes, and there's something always really interesting about vessel forms with holes in them that contain. And so this one has dovetailed corners, which took a week to cut out. And then this one is from the exhibition, and it's a big black box. No, these are in the early 90s. And this one's also dovetailed. They took a long time to make. I mean, the material is important, but the technique's important too. I mean, it's maybe not supposed to say that, but I don't want the technique to show, because then that's not the point. But it's interesting for me because of the process of the actual making, and how it affects your thought processes for what comes next. And this is just a picture of several of them, just to see how they look as a group on the floor. And some, like the one in the front, it looks like a pallet because it was designed after a pallet, but it's not quite as big, just nearly. And then these are kind of cardboard mock-ups for this piece, the wall piece that's in the exhibition. And I worked on them with watercolor and pencil, and made them in cardboard and hung them up to try and figure out the best way to present them and have them look. And then here's the ones from the show, which were the eventual ones that came from the drawings. And this is a detail. And then this is part of what the wall looks like, not the whole wall. And then I started working on, basins and these, and a lot of pieces with this brick-like surface that it has, that it sort of looks like street stones or rooftops or something. I'm not trying to make exact copies of bricks, but to get that idea, or the surface and the pattern and the texture. And then this is the big one that's in the show. And these I can make, but they take a long time to make, and I can make them by myself because I can cast all the parts, and then I grind them all down so they fit, and then I make a mold and put them together, and then by that time they weigh a couple of hundred pounds, and then I have to get somebody to help me lift them out of the kiln and turn them over and stuff like that. And then this is from Pilchuck. This is just to show how the next series of work got made. This is Boyd Suzuki and Karen Willenbrink, and these are sand-blown cylinders. And this box on the bottom is full of sand, and he's blowing into the sand, which I've dug a hole to make the form. And then this is finishing, and so we were, I think, 5 people making this thing because it weighed a lot, and it's big, and they throw off a lot of heat. And this is the one in the show, red one, that I made together with a guy I always blow glass with, a Finnish guy, Eino Mekala. And white one that has sort of a snow and ice look. And then the last slide, the big black one, which I made with Pino Signoretto in Italy, in Venice, a couple of years ago. So that's it. So.
I asked Paula to stay here for 1 second because I didn't give each of the artists a proper introduction. I just want to say, as they each come up, remember, artists are incredibly modest about their accomplishments, and Paula, for the last 30 years, has been the director of the Studio Arts program at Konstfack in Stockholm, Sweden, and that's quite an accomplishment when you think as an American who went over to a country that has a long tradition of glass. But she taught them a way to work with the material that she had learned working with people like Dale and Marvin Lepofsky out in California. So we'll talk more about that later, but she really is a legend in the field. Thank you, Paula. This is a commercial before Beth Lipman starts. I realize because this has been sort of a continuous event with the artists, I wanted to say that the Renwick Craft Invitational is a biennial, will now happen every 2 years, and the exhibition series is designed to bring 3 to 5, this year we have 4 mid-career artists working in the field of American descent. In Paula's case, it's great because we have someone who's from the United States who's built a reputation up in Europe and not known in the U.S. Anyways, these artists that are mid-career and deserving of greater attention, when you hear of the name Dale Chihuly, everyone knows Dale, but you have not heard of Paula Bartron, but now you will. And it's the same thing for the other artists. So I want to mention again, Paula Bartron is from Stockholm. We're going to have Beth Lipman, who currently resides in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, but has taught in numerous places in the country and works in glass as well in a very different way. After that, we'll have Beth Cavener Stichter, who lives near Bowling Green, Ohio, and then finally Jocelyn Châteauvert from Charleston, South Carolina, who's hand paper maker. So I'm going to turn this over to Beth, the first Beth. Hi. Okay. Hi. Yeah, I think I have everything. We'll see if this point. It's fine. It's fine. Don't panic. It's just a computer.
F5 now.
Oh yes. Thank you, God. I click and play. Okay. First, I wanted to say thank you to all parties that made this possible for me to participate at the Renwick Gallery. I never in my life dreamed that I would be in an exhibition with such outstanding artists and standing in front of you today here. So, I have to start with my mother. I'm a good Jewish girl. This is my mother's work. I grew up as a crafts child. Got to get the couch up here for me so I can just lay down for a second. I grew up in York and Lancaster County, and my mother was greatly influenced by Pennsylvania Dutch folk art, and therefore I am very influenced by Pennsylvania Dutch folk art, and also some of the very first still lives, which you'll see is something I'm somewhat fixated on, that I ever saw came from books that were really my mother's inspiration, not just mine. So she drugged me to craft shows. It was a blast. It was really fun. I loved it. I'm still in therapy over that now. It's good. Anyway, she's not technically a self-taught artist. She took some adult classes, but taught me color sense, and I did not like this work for a very long time, and then in my 30s I was like, oh, still lives. Where have I seen that before? Let me think. This is a theorem painting, or theorem stencil painting. This is called Fruit in a Blue Bowl from the mid-19th century. It's literally taken directly out of a book that I grew up with, and one of the first still lives that I had kind of seen, actually. But the thing about the theorem paintings, which I think is so interesting, is that they were really only made by women in the 19th century. They were an acceptable art form. So they had stencils that they could use, and they took tutors to help them explain or understand how to apply the paint to the velvet in some cases, paper other cases, and they made these to decorate their home. Is this too loud? Do you want me to back up? Okay. Really, though, the very first thing that I held near and dear to my heart was food, and that's really where my first interest came from, and I grew up with it. My parents
would go on ventures to New York, and we'd go to Zabar's and H&H Bagels and Bruno's Ravioli, and then we'd go across town to the Kiev to eat afterwards. So, so I started actually taking photos of food just because they were so beautiful, of all of the different bakeries that I saw, and I was also simultaneously really attracted to the waste and the decay and the consequence that happened from the meal, the feast. So I'm just going to give you a super, super brief overview of still life and why I'm fascinated with it. This is a predecessor to still life genre. The still life, and I am certainly not an expert. Is anyone here an expert? Anyone? Anyone? Down and back, get out. Get out. No. So don't correct me if I get anything wrong. But this particular painting is called Madonna della Candeletta by Carlo Crivelli. It's from 1490. And prior to the 1600s, most paintings of inanimate objects were used as supportive material for more important depictions, such as religious figures or political actions, things like that. So I just wanted to point out here the little vase on the lower portion of this painting, and also the wreath. All of these inanimate objects have inherent meaning. They have symbols that are describing the purity of the Madonna, or the pain and suffering, or the seasons, or sometimes it's also medicinal symbolism. So that's just a predecessor. This is another predecessor of still lives. These are scientific illustrations by Giovanni Battista Ferrari from the mid-1600s, actually technically after the flourishing of the still life genre, which was only depicting of the inanimate objects and no figures and no, the inanimate objects actually, I only have 15 minutes, which is why I'm just going full speed here. The inanimate objects are the thing that is symbolizing everything that you're not seeing at that point. So scientific illustrations, also a predecessor to the still life. And these were used in they were displayed in curiosity cabinets as well. So there's a whole time frame in the 1600s where food was a commodity for the first time. There was a surplus of food, and so these symbols began to take more and more importance. And also there was a renaissance in gardening and the gardening arts. This is called Tabletop Still Life with Lobster, Silver Jug, Large Berkmer, Dish of Fruit, something books too. Can't read my writing. By Peter Clays from 1641. This is the Harlem style of still life. This is something that really, this kind of genre is a way that I'm very much interested in working now. Okay. This is the first still life that I kind of reacted to in a material sense. It's called Still Life with Fruit after Severin Rosen, and it's located in the Brooklyn Museum of Art. And I was asked to participate in an exhibition in 2000 where I could choose anything from the museum and create something that was a reaction to a painting or a sculpture that they had. And this is my interpretation of that work. So this is the first piece in that series that I'm still working on. This is how I make the work. I blow, sculpt, lampwork, kiln form, glass. I basically, I work with others, I work alone, but I basically craft everything. Moving on. Enzo's. This is just a little drawing I did of a pastel at a restaurant that I ate at a lot in Italy, and this is the resulting piece. So the still lives that I choose for very specific reasons. Sometimes it's what they're depicting. Sometimes it has to do with the sentimental values, such as Enzo's. Sometimes it's because the symbolism has evolved over time, and I find that interesting. This is Still Even by Willem Claes Hede, finished in the 17th century. This is in the exhibition as well. I build all of my work, all of my compositions on patterns. So I lay down a piece of paper, and in these first works, I was more interested in creating a reference to or homage to specific paintings. But now what I do is I just basically put down that piece of paper, take components that were inspired by genres of still lives, and I start to compose, get very obsessive compulsive. My husband leaves me alone during those times. And I number everything. I make myself stop at a certain point. I number everything. And then I use this template to rebuild the work in different sites. And I think one of the reasons I work this way is because I got a BFA in both glass and fibers from Tyler School of Art, Temple University. And so the pattern, that strain of pattern that comes with working in textiles, I think was a way that I understood that I could create things, I could build things. And also, you're looking at a picture of the Barnes Foundation in Marion, Pennsylvania. And I worked as an art installer for a couple of years. They traveled 80 paintings during a time where they were renovating this entire museum. And I was one of the contractors that was hired to put every single painting back. And what they did, basically, long story long, is they took a photograph of each wall of these galleries, and they gave us one dimension from the wall to one piece on the wall. And they said, rebuild this. And so I personally, with like 6 or 7 other people, anyone in here from the Barnes Foundation? Right. We basically reinterpreted, Dr. Barnes's creation. And all of you inherently have this way that you compose your own objects in your own life. And that inherent Martha in all of us is really important. And so that totally shaped me. Just moving right along here. This is Cupboard Picture with Flowers, Fruit, Goblets by George Flegel, 1610. I interpreted this work in black, and I'm just putting this in here. This is also in the exhibition, because when I do choose to work in color of some kind, I try to create that visual frustration that you get with the clear glass, where you can see it, but you can't really own it, right? Because you're seeing through it, and it's reflecting back at you, and it's somewhat frustrating. So black on black, white on white, things like that are kind of interesting to me. In 2003, I had the honor of getting a residency at the John Michael Kohler Art Center's Arts Industry Program, which is where I actually work right now, overseeing their residency in my day job. They actually give you 2 photo shoots, and this is one of the photo shoots. They make you pose. It's not like for 2 minutes, like, just hold that. Look like you're doing something. I'm like, cool. Anyway, I had never worked in clay before, and it really changed my life. And I basically spent 3 months working alongside of people who were creating urinals and toilets and sinks, and completely and utterly humiliated by my casting ability. I mean, they walked by and kind of giggled at these like rat's nest molds that I had somehow been able to make. And so this is just the black swag, which is in the exhibition as well, in process. I thought you might want to see it. It's all built with green, which some of you might understand is just wet clay. And it's really much faster and easier for me to build like this than in glass. It was like, oh, darn it. like now's a good time to be finding that out. But the process of letting go, the process of when you always have to let go and surrender at some point in fire arts to the process. And the process came at a completely different point for me, and it was it was much harder to actually let go and let the kiln fire this work and claim it if it wanted to, destroy it or make it okay. So that was different process. So this is a black swag in the exhibition. How am I doing on time? All right, yeah. This is not in the exhibition, but it's a work in progress that was a wreath, where I took foliage from the area, I dipped it in slip, which is a liquid clay, glazed it, fired it, and the firing destroyed it. Now, to those of you who always work in clay in this audience, I apologize, but this was like revolutionary for me, and I know it's like 101 to people in their first semester of clay making. But that was like huge for me at that moment, and I started working with glass in that way. And before I was more interested in like controlling the glass, I would say, but after that process I was able to come back and let the glass slump and sag, and I became very interested in having the kiln destroy and also finish the work. This is a basket of fruit after Michelangelo Caravaggio. This is the first piece I made after coming back from Kohler, and the work is beginning to melt back and recede into the background. So I hand sculpt that work, and then I put it back in the kiln and fire it over and over and over again, essentially. Also in 2003, I had the great privilege of working at Wheaton Village with a team of about 9 or 10 people to create Banquecha. And it was the first time I really worked with others. Am I doing okay? It's fine. Time. I worked with others in a really major way. I had a deadline. I had an exhibition coming up at the John Michael Kohler Arts Center in October, and I knew I would not be able to make the amount of work I needed to. So my definition of what it was okay to accept got even broader, which is why I'm totally lazy now. But I basically gave color Xeroxes of still life paintings to these 10 people of various skill levels, and I said, choose something from these paintings. You can try to make it. You can try to make it twice. I don't care if it falls on the ground and breaks, but it's going in the kiln. I'm putting it on the table. And this is the Banquecha. So I took all of those components. I also kiln formed and lamp worked afterwards and assembled this work. And this is my last image. No, it's not. It's my second to last image. After that, it's like, what do you do after that, right? So after that, I just kind of started going back to what is really fundamental in this work, and it's that inherent need to kind of compose and use these objects to reflect a certain status, a certain point in everyone's history, what you own, what you eat. It became really fundamental, so I started taking components and just not looking at any paintings whatsoever, just using the vocabulary that I had and creating works that could end up anywhere, basically. So, Jane, you could take this work, divide it up into 3, make your own compositions, do whatever you want with it. You've got the components, kind of thing. Yeah, I have like more. Sorry. This is large Milan bouquet after Jan Bruegel the Elder. I don't actually think I have a picture of the large bouquet that's in the exhibition. I don't, but if you go to the exhibition, you can see the work that I made specifically for the Renwick Gallery for that. And then I know this looks really white and overblown, and it's supposed to. But currently I've been working only in photography, where I'm taking these components and I'm arranging the composition, working with a photographer, taking the photograph, destroying the glass, and recycling it. So I'll leave it at that. Okay.
I'm going to have Beth Cavener Stichter come up next. I just have to correct 2 things. Beth Lipman is far from lazy. She's one of the most hardworking artists, like all of them, here, and she will be coming back to give a talk about the John Michael Kohler Art Center's Art and Industry program, which is very interesting in that it allows artists who maybe have never worked in ceramics, this is the case with Beth, to come in and experiment with materials. And in conjunction with this kind of approach, also down the line, we'll be having Patricia Watkins from Pilchuck, where the school that the summer school Dale Chihuly started, and she will talk about their artist in residency program, because at the Renwick we have a number of pieces in our collection that have come out of this amazing collaboration for artists who are new to the material. So I'm going to welcome Beth Cavener Stichter.
I heard that. Okay. All right, my name is Beth Cavener Stichter, and I wish this were me, but it is not. I just found this picture on the internet and loved it. But again, I feel like I also need to start by saying a word about my parents. I was incredibly fortunate to grow up amongst two extraordinary people. My mother, who was an art teacher, and later in life became an artist herself, full-time, and my father, who's a molecular biologist. And both of them brought me up with an incredible appreciation for the natural world and an ability to see and understand and translate those visions into statements about how I felt and saw them myself. I started off working figuratively. I got my undergraduate degree at Haverford College, and we studied from the model every day. But when I left from that school, I didn't really want to do just the figure. There was something more primal, more primitive, something about the emotional content, the psychological depths that people displayed just through their body language that I wanted to get across in my work. So I began with these hybridized images where I took the human figure and combined them with animal forms. This is a piece called She Speaks and Whispers. And after I did a whole series of hybrid forms, I realized that these hybrids spoke of an otherness, sort of a distance from our everyday experience, and people coming up to these pieces weren't saying, oh, that's exactly the way I feel, or I empathize with that piece. Instead, they were just seeing them as curious objects, as narrative tales. And I really wanted my pieces to reach into the gut of people and elicit a response that was familiar and strange at the same time. So instead, I started working back with the human figure, but I left something of that animal nature behind underneath those skins. This is a piece, a life-size piece I did called Play. And she's covered with a white, silky slip called Terra sigillata that was just like skin. There's a detail from her. The thing about these life-size figures that have these primal, more animal-like natures is they still reeked of that otherness. And it's been a battle through my entire artistic career to overcome that otherness to a certain extent so that you felt a part of the work as a viewer. So since I couldn't capture the animal inside of a human skin, I thought, well, what happens if I take animal skins and I stuff something human inside of them? So I started creating every day a little study of some sort of animal, some sort of little feral beast, and I tried to capture something of it, some emotional content, some psychological moment in a person's life. These are two little studies I made out of plastilina, which is clay mixed with oil and wax. And when I did my thesis exhibition at my MFA show at Ohio State University, I displayed 200 of these little daily studies that were swarming across the floor of this abandoned warehouse where I set up my show. And the show was called Tremble, Shiver. Another piece that was in that exhibition was this large dead boar that I created. And I submerged it in this tank, which held basically what I created was 1,000 pounds of sugar, which I spent 48 straight hours mixing and boiling with water until I'd filled the entire tank full of supersaturated syrup. And then I submerged this boar down into the tank and left it sitting there for about 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks' time, we pulled it out, and the whole piece had crystallized with sugar crystals. This was the sugar-encrusted boar in the exhibition Tremble, Shiver. Here's a close-up of that. And what was really beautiful is you could still see sort of the pinkish glow of the clay underneath, and it looked just like skin, and the whole piece sort of glowed with its own light. I didn't need to light it at all in the exhibition because it was picking up and refracting a halo around itself. In that exhibition, this was one of the monumental figures. This piece was called the Sentinel Hare. It was about 6.5 feet long. And these were the Spanish feral meat goats. And they're about me-sized, but hung on the wall just about a foot off the floor in various states of struggle and resignation. After I completed my MFA, I was incredibly fortunate to be invited to do a 1 or 2 year long residency out at the Archie Bray Foundation in Helena, Montana. And it was absolutely crucial because, like most graduate students coming out of school, I was completely burnt out and really discouraged about my work and didn't know where to go. And so having 2 years as a resident artist surrounded by other incredibly talented people really helped keep my creative juices flowing. But because I was put into a new situation, thousands of miles away from my husband and my home, a lot of the work they created out here at the Bray was about trying to fit in and trying to find a place in which I felt comfortable and secure instead of, incredibly afraid and trembling from some inner insecurity. This piece is about that. This piece is called The Cornered Hare. This piece, sorry, dimensions are bad with me. This piece is about this large. This is a little study that I did about yay big. This is called The Wildness Within. And it's just a little solid porcelain study trapped within a glass box. After my first year at the Bray, I did an installation called Human Space, Animal Body. This piece was called Object Lesson Arrogance, and it's a life-size rhinoceros head that I sculpted out of clay and then took a rubber mold off of it and cast it out of hydrostone. And then right before the exhibition, I took a wet clay slip and covered the whole head with a wet clay slip and let it dry and crack and peel like sad flaking skin off of the rhinoceros head during the course of the exhibition. This piece was called Object Lesson Apathy, and there was a little bit of water dripping from this tap above it, so that during the course of the exhibition, the goat was slowly drowned beneath the level of water. There's a detail. And this piece is in the Renwick exhibition currently. This was called The Inquisitors, made during my second year at the Archie Bray Foundation. And I wanted to show over a quick couple of slides about how I make these. I start off with these plastilina maquettes like this. And then I build a really quick armature out of some sort of steel pipe. Sometimes it's welded together, sometimes it's just screwed together like this black pipe that I just got at Home Depot. And then just using my body really physically, anywhere from around 800 to 4,000 pounds of clay go into massing these in solid. And here you see me just using my feet to really kick at and try to push the clay in different directions. Oftentimes I'll have to hang from the ceiling or stand on implements to try to see down on these creatures to see how they're developing from every angle. And this was the piece, 2,000 pounds, roughed in solid. And then I go through a really laborious process over a period of 2.5 months of hollowing these pieces out until they're about 1/4 of an inch thick. And then I reassemble them all back together while they're still wet and fire them as a whole thin eggshell. So all the pieces that you'll see in the exhibition look really large and massive and have a presence to them, but they're really these very delicate skins that you could crawl inside of if there were an opening. And there's the finished piece. There's another in-process shot in my studio. If I'm doing a piece that's hanging, I have to sculpt it hanging. If it's going to go on the wall, I have to sculpt it on the wall. And it's all because I'm very in tune with the way that you come to these pieces physically. I want the way that you walk up to them to relate to you directly. So while I'm making them, I'm thinking about their gaze and their body language and how they're reacting to you as you come up to them and view them. This was a piece I wanted to make hanging from the ceiling. This is called Object Lesson Descension. And she's very precariously balanced in the ceiling with a pulley so that as you walk past it, the wine barrel would rock ever so slightly and the goat would rise and fall. This is another in-process shot where I'm putting one of these hollowed out pieces back together using whatever's handy, sometimes ace bandages, sometimes husbands. And oftentimes they're so delicate that I have to reassemble them in the kiln. with all sorts of crazy supports holding them together until they're fired and finished. This piece is also in the exhibition. It's called Confessions and Convictions. This piece is called No Going Back. The director at the Bray asked all of the residents to make a cup or a small object that would fit on one of these shelves. And so again, sort of addressing that desiring fiercely to fit in and to be one of these people. This is sort of my attempt to hang on and be there. This piece I just think of as called The Dirty Bunny. But the title is called Strange Attraction. This piece is called I'll Not Tell. And she's about the size of a 7-year-old child hung on the wall. The detail. And after about 4.5 years of living apart from my husband doing residencies in graduate school, we finally moved back in together, and this is a piece I made about that. This was called Bliss. And then after I got back from the Bray, I set up a little studio in Portage, Ohio, which is just south of Bowling Green. There's nothing but cornfields and one stoplight for miles and miles around us. And this is a piece I made there called Megrim, and this is also in the show. And it's about sort of that straining to achieve some impossible goal. And if this poor goat, which is myself, would just let go of the rope, she wouldn't be in such a precarious and awful situation. But the tighter she pulls, the more uncomfortable she is. The detail. This is also in the exhibition. This was in a response to the piece called I'll Not Tell. I realized that I was making lots of these victimized hares, and I wanted to do a piece that was sort of fighting back. So this piece is called One Last Word. This piece is called Sometimes Shadows Move. And after I'd been living in Ohio for about a year, I decided that I wanted to do a whole series of work that was about the undercurrents of human sexuality, because lots of my work people had addressed as being subliminally sexual, that there were sort of fears and anxieties about our own sexuality hidden in them. So I thought, all right, I'm going to take that head on, even though I was immensely uncomfortable with that idea. And I created a whole body of work, which you'll see now that I created over the past year, that dealt with specifically the way we express our sexuality through weird little personality quirks and the ways in which we do and don't know that we're expressing those things. So using sexuality as a way to discuss emotional content and psychological content in my work. Some of it's very subtle, like this piece. This piece is called The Golden Fool. And all these are portraits of very specific people that I encountered and who had sort of the, sometimes the guts and sometimes the, humorous outcomes of telling me what their sexual lives were like. And so I created these portraits of them as a detail of The Golden Fool. This piece is called Please. And she's also in the exhibition. This was a portrait of a woman I met in a workshop. And believe it or not, I really thought she was wonderful and loved her, but she had this very abrasive personality and didn't know how to let people into her life. She'd been sexually abused by her father while she was growing up. And so at the same time that she pushed everyone out of her life and didn't want them to love her, to be close to her, she desperately tried to be loved and wanted to be loved. And so the surface on these pieces is a Martha Stewart designer paint. And it's an interior latex that she has a whole color line that she's designed that have specific emotional and psychological impacts according to her. And so this piece is covered in intimate romance. This piece is called Olympia, after the Manet painting. And it's a self-portrait of me, obviously. And how intensely uncomfortable I am with my own sexuality and being viewed as a sexual object. And so instead of the very brazen gaze that Olympia has, I've blindfolded myself and left myself vulnerable and open. This piece is also in the exhibition called I Am No One. This piece is called Pleasure. This piece is called Necessary Delusion. I met a man who was very into mirrors, liked to see what he was doing while he was, romantically involved. And the idea of being able to see myself during this was just abhorrent to me. And I thought, I need to think that I'm beautiful and attractive during this act. I can't see the real thing. And so this was me as if I was seeing it, and I was just like, whoa, you know, like, and I was just like, okay, honey, let me know when you're done. And I was like, sorry, I'm still not used to talking about these pieces yet. They're a little edgy. This is a portrait of my family as sexual objects, which was really uncomfortable for me. But so I have my father as the randy goat. Myself as sort of the strange, ambiguous tomboy who I've sculpted myself here as a male with my penis upside down. And my mother, who's the virgin, she must never have sex. I don't want to know about it. Oh boy. This piece was, I had a friend out at the Archie Bray who was a lesbian, and she very courageously many times talked to me about what it meant to be gay, and many times asked me, well, how do you know you're straight? How do you know that these aren't things that are buried inside of you? And she was very tenacious about getting after me about thinking about these things when I was making this work. And so this piece I made about her, and it's titled after a T.S. Eliot poem, and it's called Do I Dare to Eat a Peach? And then there's a detail. This piece was called Milk and Honey, after a couple who like to eat food off of one another. And they were beautiful people. They had me over for dinner. Nothing happened, but this piece is called Milk and Honey, and as their paws are sort of draped over one another, they're sinking into their pillowy marshmallow-like bodies, and this fluid is sort of emerging from their paws, and on one side is a liquid coming out from them that looks like milk, and on the other side something that looks like honey, and one of them's licking the honey off of its fingers. And their bodies are sort of drooped and draped over this stand that they're sitting on. This piece is also in the exhibition called Run. This one is called, well, we don't need to go over that one. This one was a portrait that I did of a man who has an incredibly strong impression on me. And because the cat got out of the bag and he found out it was him, I'll go ahead and tell you that it's a portrait of my gallery representation, Garth Clark. And just sort of the power that he emits, not only as a human being and as an art curator, but as a person with a very strong sexual sense of himself. He was very brave and shared lots of stories with me. And this is a portrait I created of him called Empire of Dust. And that's it. Thank you very much.
I have to do my little commercials at the end. When you go over to the exhibition, what's astonishing, the 10 works by Beth in the show were all done from the last 3 years. So you saw an intense amount, in a short period of time, she created an intense body of work. And one of the things that enabled this was the fact that you heard Paula has been teaching at Kunstfach, and we know that Beth Lipman has another job. And I'm very happy that there are opportunities, and there should be more out there for artists in residence and grants. So Beth Stichter received a number of these that allowed her for large periods of time just to focus on her work. And I think those times are, and all of them would agree, to have this intense period where you can just build and push your work. And even though her work addresses very difficult and tough themes, she laces it with a bit of humor and Martha Stewart, but I think that she hits us in the gut, and it really does touch to the deepest parts of our humanity. I'm really delighted to introduce our fourth artist, Jocelyn Châteauvert, who lives in Charleston, South Carolina. And I'll sort of add and confess that if any of you saw the Grant Wood exhibition at the Renwick a year ago, he was someone who started out in Iowa. And Jocelyn is another Iowa artist, originally from Iowa. Jocelyn.
Tough act to follow. Such an honor, though, to be with these wonderful women, all ambitious. I'll start with my slides. I just brought a small collection. kind of a chronological thing. And I hope this works, but I'm not there, am I? AV help? I don't know how anybody else feels.
Okay. Escape out of that.
Oh, yes, F5.
And you may see your program down at the bottom. There we go.
I was in graduate school at the University of Iowa. I was studying with Chung-Hee Chu, who made a surprise visit for me this weekend in honor of this exhibit. And while I was there, somebody suggested that I take hand paper making. Now, I had no affinity for the material. I didn't know that much about it. I didn't know what it could do. But Tim Barrett had recently arrived at Iowa and had been there just a couple years. He wasn't really well. He was very well known outside, but really not known within the school. There wasn't a lot of. They didn't make it known what an expert he was in his field. So I said okay, and I took the class, and I immediately fell in love with the material, and I immediately took over the studio. And I think I was pretty much the first graduate student who had a lot of cubbies filled with a lot of things, and spent as many waking hours as I could there. Now, Chung-Hee missed me, but this is what I needed to do, and it was what I needed to pursue. So I started working with material, which eventually I came back to, and that was working with it wet. I make my sheets. I make all my sheets individually by hand, and I press the excess water out, and then I form them when the material is very plastic. What happens after that is I let things air dry, the surface distorts, you get a nice topography, and in this case I started making books. Paper, of course, lends itself to books, and it seemed like the first thing to start interpreting and take apart. So what I did was I started couching, where you're removing the sheet from the mold face, and I couched the sheets together. Now, paper will not stick to itself unless you put it under pressure. So the only pressure I applied to make the books, to make the binding, in fact, was at the edge of the sheets. So there's no glue, there's no other material in these book forms, as you can kind of see that they're book forms laced inside of these wooden structures. And I thought that was fascinating unto itself. So I started making large work pretty quickly because it was such a well-equipped studio. We had large molds, we had a large press, and these are flax on found sticks. I was fortunate to live in a house that allowed me to walk a path to graduate school. It was a natural path. It wasn't urban. There were trees, so I could pick up things along the way going to school. So these were called life raft. They're about 3.5 feet long, maybe 3.5, 4 feet tall. After graduate school, I felt it was my job to make a job. I wasn't interested in teaching, though it interests me. I started in my mother's garage. And we lived in Iowa, and that meant her car couldn't go in there in the winter. But this is what I needed to do. I had been in a very public venue at graduate school. People are always looking on your bench, seeing what you're up to. So I kind of recoiled from that environment in my mother's garage and started doing these silver pieces, silver hollow-formed boxes called private spaces. They were all linked, a lot of intensive soldering, a lot of cutting with a saw, which I love to do. And I started a collection of these, and so these were the first things that I started sharing with the public. I then started taking the paper, and there's a huge leap between those and this. But I think what this references is it's so interesting how you come back to forms that, we think we develop a vocabulary. I think the vocabulary is always within us. There are certain things we're attracted to, sometimes we know where it comes from. I often feel like wherever I'm at, it's because of a cumulative effect of my entire life. So here's a book form with this piercing, this cut saw work on sterling. I was a jeweler. I found it fascinating to connect sterling silver with handmade paper. Sterling seems, like it will last forever, but in fact I knew the paper could last about as long. These are the paper I make is very archival. It will last maybe 500 years because of its pH balance. And so I thought it was intriguing to add sterling with paper. Good juxtaposition, makes kind of people think. So this is called Volume 1, and I did a series of this. This one is in the exhibition. And I like it. Evanston. This piece had been at the Davenport Museum of Art under Jane's direction, moving metals, correct? Moving metal, something like that, yeah? With Chung Hee Chu. So I was pretty well 5-6 years into after graduate school, and I made this rattle. It's a rattle inside her beans. It's got a nice kind of movement to it. But before Jane came for the first time to my studio to, so to speak, interview me on pieces for the possible exhibition from the ground up, I cleaned out a whole lot of things. I cleaned out all the receipts from my prior craft show experience, meaning anybody who'd bought a one-of-a-kind, I no longer knew who that was. A lot of information just went by the wayside, and I melted this piece. It became a piece of material. As Paula said earlier, I often purge with a hammer. This could be the same way for me. I didn't drop it. If I dropped it, it would still be here. But I melted it. Jane was nonetheless disappointed. So this is a rattle. This darn piece put me on the map. What can I say? It became, it started out a vision. It started out as something one would wear as a belt form, but then it didn't have much movement, and I wanted movement on the body. I wanted to flow and kind of shape with the body. So I thought of this piece as lingerie. Jane has brought it up a number of times. It's Eve, clothes optional. And it was, and it's 6 layers of paper, really fabricated by hand. When I creased the paper, as you see in the lines, I hope you can see in the lines of the fig leaf itself, it compresses the fiber itself so it makes it white. So just by manipulating a white sheet of paper, you can get more tones. I also score the shape, and so all the edges have this nice white line that kind of bring the eye back into the center of the piece. And of course, then you just have this natural snake-like form running up the middle as a stem. Eve, followed by an Adam, followed by my son Elvin. I then wanted to work with something bigger than my hands. I had done a lot of production jewelry, hundreds and hundreds of pieces, and I wanted to make big things. I think as an artist, you just kind of programmed that way. But I wanted to make things, and this is prior to making anything that was internally lit. I wanted to make paper that was self-supporting. I knew it could be. I'd worked with it a number of years already. I had seen too much paper that had this matrix, this internal structure to it, and it didn't need it, in my opinion. So I started doing vessels, taking those sheets of paper, pleating, folding the paper when it's wet, letting it dry, and then sculpting it into these round vessel forms. It stands up upon itself. It's never wilted. It's never drooped. People ask about humidity. I live in Iowa. I live in Charleston now. This doesn't seem to be an issue. It's really the integrity of the fiber. It has something to do with how thick I would make a sheet. It has something to do with how long I would beat the fiber, meaning cut the fiber before I make the sheets. But it did answer the fact that it could be self-supporting. This is simply called vessel. I introduced light into that form. These are my jellyfish. These are fairly recent. You know, when you introduce light into paper, it's amazing what happens. Because of the different ways that I work with it, I can do something more opaque, I can do something more translucent, and I can shape the paper. The pleats give it a structure, but then they add a line to it. So these are the jellies. And they're about 3.5 feet tall and maybe 18 to 24 inches around at the top. This is a part of an installation at a gallery in Charleston, Nina Lou. Some other examples of lighting, hopefully showing some of the detail, some of the things I can do with this very plastic material. These are simply twisted. These are in the exhibit, of course. Pink boudoir. It was actually kind of a stumble upon thing. I had made simply the small sconces on the left without red paper, and I had a sheet laying there, so I tucked it behind it, and it gave off this intense color, a little muted, not as strong as a plain red, but was kind of delightful. Is when you turn these off, you don't see the red. They're just white, so you get this nice shock when you turn them on. This one on the right is 4 feet tall, I think 18-inch across. No internal structure. It's just simply taking the paper and arcing it over a wooden base and tacking it. Migration. Based on a theme I'd started earlier, this one is 5 feet tall. It's an oval shape with kind of a jointed knee, cord covering, which I hope reminded Beth of a goat leg. So these pieces, I got an industrial sewing machine. Gluing was very hard on my hands. It took time. So I bought a 1962 Singer industrial sewing machine and cut all these points when they were wet, let things dry, and sewed the piece together, constructed the piece. I then went back in and I creased every single point by hand when it was dry. I think there's about 1,900 of them, to give it a crisper surface. I love the fact that the paper, when it dries, becomes very organic, but sometimes I want to go back into it and give it a stronger graphic quality. This is a little pocket of South Carolina. We see after to and from picking my son up from school. It's maybe 2 acres. And you just see it kind of tucked back in off the road. But fortunately, because we have to protect our marshlands, this is the kind of scene that you can pick up driving through virtually any part of my city. It may be small like this, it may be large. So it's something that has really resonated with me, to live in a semi-urban environment. It's a 500,000 population, pretty much. And to see this natural beauty that can't be pushed aside, can't be, mown over or, concreted over. It has to stay like this. And, then you see birds in this, and we start looking to see what kind of bird is there. So this gives you a little sense of what I get to see on a daily basis in Charleston, South Carolina. The trees are particularly an attraction of mine. The kind of gray mass over there is an ancient live oak tree. And in my first major commission, I did a tree. It's for the Circular Congregational Church, one of the oldest churches in Charleston, established in 1681. The original building is not the same, but it's an incredible building nonetheless. This sits in the vestibule. It's called Reach. It is 11 feet 4 inches tall and spans 6 feet. It is a conglomeration of papers, hopefully saying something to the congregation, how they are such a mix of people, but they come together. They are the best-serving humanitarian church in the city. They outreach to an incredible number of people, have a real sense of service, and it was an honor to do a piece, first in a historic building, and then for a congregation that really seemed to live their values. It's internally lit, and it's the tree of life for them. This is a last-minute studio shot before I'm walking out the door just the other day. The grid at the top, maybe you see that. That's how I started constructing the lily clouds in the exhibit. It's how I started making the curtain. It's a fairly large space. All behind that is papers. You know, I just have a lot of paper. As much as I like working with it wet, sometimes it doesn't go in the direction you thought, so I archive it. I might introduce it with a wet. I might just do a dry piece, as in the Circular Church Reach piece. But it's like my references. It's my library of papers and what I can do and what I've done with them. It's about 1,900 square feet. This is one side, and then I have another side that's more of a dry area. This is my more wet area. This is a little bit of the exhibition. It is a live oak trunk. I am fortunate to have a 400-year-old live oak in my backyard. And there is a reverence I feel for these trees that I want to express. I am not ashamed to express. This is constructed, in fact, as a solid, large piece of paper, which I then dye with the outer husk of a black walnut. And I boil it down and I make this paint. So this big, dry, rectangular sheet of paper, I then paint with the walnut with rollers. And then I scrunch up while it's wet with the ink. And it dries to this crisp, strong form. This is 26 diameter, 10 feet tall. Next to it graces the Adam and Eve for our Naked Forest installation. And a little bit of the tapestry to the left. Oops. This is marsh. But I call it marsh because that's the influence from which it came from. But I like to think of the work as more abstract than that. Perhaps it's snow on grass. Perhaps it's an interpretation from the viewer themselves. I do like to take a memory, take something I've seen, interpret it in the paper. The paper is so giving and so filled with a vitality. I approach a subject and the paper rewards me greater than my vision. It has been consistently that way. It is the most rewarding material to work with. It seems to want to talk. So, I've learned to let it, of course. I've learned to let it speak for itself, to take on its forms for itself, to let it become more of itself and less of me. This is, of course, internally lit. It's 11 feet long by 4.5 feet wide. Many people have come up in the last 24 hours and want to lay down on it. Don't do that there. And this is the last slide I have. This was made for the exhibit and extremely challenging. And I don't think it was because of the scale of it, though in the end I probably made about 50 prototypes for things that were included in the exhibit. And there's about 5,000 sheets of handmade paper, either that were involved in the maquettes or in the show itself. It was such a strong piece to have as an entrance to your own space, and especially in the color of red. So I wanted to be able to get through it and not just look at it and to confront you, but I wanted to be able to find a way through to the other side. It's 12 feet high by 10 feet wide. All the leaves were created when they were wet. There are, in fact, about 18 to 20 different colors within the piece. And each of the leaves is then wrapped together to another leaf or another stem with very fine gauged copper wire. It took about 6 times to get it right. We were weaving, unweaving. And I think it's spectacular how the Smithsonian, how the Renwick, and especially Jane, has cited this piece to live through that exhibit. It's such an experience to walk through the entire exhibit from one artist to the next, material to the next. It's called Scratch. The other side, the white side with the copper leaves, kind of flow inside of itself. And paper is a noisy, noisy material. Making jewelry with it was part of the fun and part of the challenge, to have that constant rubbing. So with that, I'd like to, am I over? I'd like to read a poem. I hope I have enough saliva to do so. The Lanyard. The other day, as I was ricocheting slowly off the blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one more suddenly into the past. A past where I sat at a workbench, at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. But that I had never seen anyone use a lanyard, or wear one if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education, and here is your lanyard. I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here I wish to say to her now is a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-toned lanyard from my hands, I was sure, as a boy could be, that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. Mother, this is your lanyard.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I want to add that one of her teachers is actually in the audience, Chung-Yi Chu, and we're lucky enough to have acquired a work in the last year by this talented metalsmith and educator of the last 30 years. And her instructor, Tim Barrett, who has really been one of the leaders of the craft of hand papermaking, came through the exhibition, and it was really amazing to watch him stop and look at her work and simply say, only paper could do this. All right, I'm going to ask everyone to come up. We are running a little behind schedule, but we're going to formulate a little bit of a round table and then open it up for questions because we do have a reception, and I know some of you are here over lunch, so we're going to cut it off in exactly 15 minutes.
How many people made a lanyard? I still have mine. What are you doing with it? I used mine for a whistle. Yeah. In case of danger. Should I start?
Yeah, this is Susanne Frantz, the juror that I talked about and leading scholar of contemporary glass, but also of craft. So we're going to turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you all for coming today. And quickly, just a commercial for Jane. We all want to thank Jane very, very much. We're all inspired by her. She's a treasure. And when you have a treasure, you should protect it and take good care of it and not let it get stolen away. First of all, I want to address a question to everybody. We're so fortunate to be here and get to hear directly from the artists' mouths their thoughts about their own work, but usually we don't have that benefit. And as somebody who writes about work, I can call them up and ask them a few questions, but we take a lot of liberties when we look at someone's work and try to interpret it, try to get the message that the artist, I like to hope, is trying to communicate to us. But I also feel like I'm not getting it sometimes, and that I'm really being kind of impertinent trying to interpret this work and wondering how much of it I'm getting wrong or projecting onto it. So I wanted to ask each one of these artists today, if they were, and perhaps this would help us look at other work, if they were looking at their own work cold and hadn't seen it before and walked up to it, what would they look for? Could they give us a little guide, a little step-by-step of analysis of looking at their own work that we can apply to anything that we look at? I'm sorry, this wasn't on the list.
Give a time limit.
Each one of you, just think about it. Or you could think about walking up to someone's work here that you didn't know before the exhibition. And I know I start by asking myself questions. And can you, for example, Jocelyn, had you ever seen Beth Lipman's work in person?
Not in the round. Not in the round. I suppose as a maker, and knowing the premise of the show and the caliber of which people Jane would choose, I knew there was incredible intimacy within the material itself to come to that level of expression. So I think, for me, I'm looking usually for the hand and the evidence of the hand in the work.
Would that be the first thing when you approach a work of art or a
I
work of
wanna
anything?
Maybe because I make things, I want to see the hand of the maker in the piece. Yeah, I want to see the human gesture somehow portrayed.
Beth, what about you?
Beth number one. I'm Lib, she's Stick.
Yeah, what about when you saw Stick's work for the first time?
I guess for me, the most important thing, the very, very most important initial thing is my visceral reaction to the work. It's not a mental thing at all. So if a work grabs me in my gut, which your work does, then I stop and I start to think about the work, and I analyze the work after that. But that's just personally why I keep looking at art and what I get excited about when I look at art.
Paula, your work of the four artists is the least literal. And also, working with glass and working with hot glass, you have to use tools. So there's not, when there's a mark of the hand, there's a mark of a tool in someone who uses hot glass. What would you say to someone who is approaching your work? And I know artists don't want to spoon feed people and are also modest and don't feel like they should project something on the viewer. Just take away whatever you get from it. But give us a break here, Paula. And what would you like somebody to take away from your work? What would help a person look at your work?
I would hope that they would look at see the material, and that everything is considered, and and the material and the content and the form, the texture, and that would, give them, that they would see that. I don't know, what would you say? I don't know. See that it's considered, that it's a whole.
Yeah, whole. That's what.
I think the thing that I get most out of Paula's work, and I'm usually attracted to non-figurative, non-literal work the most as an artist, and Paula's work is incredibly strong for me because it has such a sense of time, and the material is so raw. And you said it's the least specific, but for me it's the most specific of the show, because the material has been stripped of all of its unnecessary elements and is just there in its most basic, most brutal form, in a way, but with a delicacy and a consideration for the form and the line in which they've been displayed. And to me, that's a real power punch. That's the kind of work I walk into and I leave haunted with. It makes me think about it again and again, and every object that I see in my life as I continue out of that room, it's reminiscent of that material and that time.
It's a nice way to walk into the exhibition, too, and see that grid of discs up on the wall. It's very powerful when you walk in.
Thank you. Yeah, and, one thing that I think we're really lucky, once you leave this auditorium, you step into our American Art Museum, and you're walking around and you're looking at the various paintings and sculpture. Of course, the Renwick is across the town, and the collection's focused on 20th century and contemporary artists who worked in craft materials. And I think that you will not look at their work any differently than you will look at the work that's here in the museum. We have the benefit of actually having the artists here to talk about their work. Often as art historians, and Susanne, just like she said, we sometimes start to write and think, and it's really hard to stop ourselves and to learn to look. But I'm really glad to hear that all four of them talked about the essence of the material, and Susanne and I were talking that all four of them looked very intently at nature, and that was one of the ideas when I looked for one theme to tie their four work together, because we selected them based on the merits of their work. But also we were sorting through, I don't know, hundreds of artists, and we were looking for a certain affinity, and I didn't know what to do to put my finger on it. And I came up with something called From the Ground Up, to really focus on the fact that these artists start with the rawest materials, but they're intimately involved with the process of the material. So even though they have an idea, they're constantly learning from the material. So I just think
it's very striking that each of you said something about that mark making in the essence of the material.
I had a specific question for Paula and Beth Lipman, because I'm a glass person and they're glass people, and they're from different generations and they approach the material so differently. And I wanted them to talk about, Paula, your experience as one of really the first or the second generations of American studio glass artists, and as a woman during that period, when there were women, we don't hear about them very much, but there were certainly women in the field, but not that many blowing glass. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like when you were in graduate school as a student, and now looking back on the United States, from all these years you've kept an eye on the glass scene, what's your observation as an interested and disinterested party?
Well, when I was a graduate, or when I studied under Marvin as a graduate student, and then there were mostly boys in the class. So at one point I was the only woman, but I was his assistant too, so I bossed him as good as I could. And when there were the parties, I organized the parties. I bought all the wine, and they made the food. So you had to keep them in line in a way. But yeah, I mean, there is a real macho thing about the glass, and I remember one time at Pilchuck, it must have been 1988, and they were sandcasting, and they were sandcasting with ladles, and I had applied to be a TA, and I didn't get it, and they said because I wasn't strong enough to lift the ladles. And the thing is, I sandcast with a ball, which takes skill, but sandcasting with ladles takes no skill. You can learn it in 2 hours. And I asked, well, I want to, and they wouldn't let any of us cast with ladles. And I said, well, I'm going to do it with a big ladle myself, and I did, and they clapped, and I thought it was so stupid. But
was it different in Sweden when you went there?
Well, we have all girls in our class. There's very, very often, mostly girls in the glass blowing classes, and not so many boys. And the boys are sort of sissy-ish, I think, and want me to bandage their fingers if they cut themselves.
Well, I think worldwide now, women, female students outnumber men in the glass programs in all over the world, and it doesn't seem to have been the problem that people thought that it was 30 years ago for women to hoist a big hunk of hot glass around. But how about looking back from Sweden, looking at the way things have progressed here in the United States the past 30 years, the glass scene in general?
Yeah,
you have a perspective that we don't have.
Yeah, well, in those early days, people were doing the best Tiffany copies they could over and over and over, and silver nitrate over and over and over, and I think people have really developed, and there's lots of artists with real individual ways of working, and it has developed incredibly, and the women are really good, and there's no difference. It's just to work as an artist and develop your things.
We have to throw, we're reclaiming Paula, because the last 30 years she's lived in Sweden. She's received all of these grants and is showing in all of these Swedish art exhibitions around the world. And so it's kind of amazing as an American to be so imbued in that other culture. And so her work's in all the major collections in Europe, and I'm thrilled to say that we're about to get one, maybe two if we're lucky, for our collection.
Well, I think you were very brave to take this step of showing the work of an expatriate artist, because that is something a little bit different, and I think it brings something different to the Renwick and to the exhibition program. I really believe that when you pull up roots and you start anew, it's not only brave, but it changes your work, changes your perspective. Do you think it changed your work? Would you be a different artist if you'd stayed here, Paula?
I've thought about that, and many times, but probably would. because you're influenced by what's going on around you, and you get a different perspective living somewhere else. Yeah.
And Beth is a perfect example of the next generation who I don't think you experienced any of that, or I guess you did experience some of it, but it's changed. Yeah, it's not an issue anymore, is it?
No, I mean, for me, something that I had to, and I continue to try to negotiate, is whether I strive for perfection in craft or not. That's much more of an issue because most of the artists that work in the United States and also abroad that work in glass are very much tied to technique, and that is what counts when you're working in glass.
There's definitely a technical obsession.
So if you're not obsessed with technique, it's like you're almost like you're reading a completely different language, and so.
Are we going full circle back to technique is cheap again? I hate to think so, but
I don't think technique is cheap. I mean, you can't get away from it. It is what you need to make. We all need.
But you use it for what you need, and you don't use it when you don't need it, and you choose.
It's the foundation.
Yeah.
It's like life drawing.
But it is
it's the
balance.
foundation.
You need a balance.
I think it's true because they're all technical masters in their material and field, but it also allows them to push the limits in a completely different way. As if, unlike a traditional sculptor that might do something in plasticine and say, "I'd like to see what this works like in glass," it's not going to come out the same way if you've been blowing and sculpting hot glass. And if you want to create something in paper, let's say Martin Purrier decided something you wanted in paper, no one's going to understand the soft structural properties of paper, hand paper like Jocelyn, or when it comes to clay. So I think that mastery is critical. Even if you defy it and break the rules, you're breaking the rules with a body of knowledge.
I would just like to state for the record that I am not a master of glass. Those of you out in the audience, you know that I'm not. No, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but there's a difference between understanding a material and being a master of a craft process. And I that's all I'm going to say on that one. There's like, it's more about the art than it is about mastering the craft.
Right. Well, I don't think it's a dominance over the material,
Yeah.
I think that's, again, all of you said that over and over again. It's a very physical. All four of you are very physical with your material, and when I say, you're both intently making something, but you're open to accidents and response, and that's something, that kind of process is also really unique in clay. And Beth, when you're carving out those animals, the interior of those beings is just as powerful as the exterior. So, I don't know. I disagree with the master. Yeah, Beth number one, Beth number two.
I need to know.
I'm a master of hollowing out. I don't think anyone would dispute that. I'm incredibly anal retentive about it, to the point. My hollowing is completely unnecessary, is what makes it strange that it's part of my process. But for me, the way that I work with my material is very important to the psychological content I bring to them. The fact that when I sculpt them solid out of clay, they have this weight and this presence to them, and they're very angular and very muscular. But when I'm inside of them and I'm hollowing them out, that's when they become more feminine. That's when they gain a sinuosity. That's when I can push on the walls from the inside out, and the breath is brought into the pieces. And I always think of there being a struggle between the masculine and the feminine in my work, and part of it's the inside and part of it's the outside. But both of them are related to the process that I use to make them. So
It sort of seems like a reverse butchering process to me, too.
it is, yeah, very much so.
Yeah, it's very personal.
Yeah.
My understanding is, or my impression is that all of you work alone, or you're not running a workshop making with a whole bunch of assistants making variations on a theme. Would you like to?
Sure, part of the year, every year, it'd be fabulous. Because my work becomes a material too. I mean, it starts as material, then it turns into something else, but then I love when I lose the preciousness over the fact that I've spent hundreds of hours on something, and I can turn it back into a material to manipulate again.
Like the melting the piece down and starting anew.
Maybe, but more with the paper. Just treating it as the beginning of something instead of saying this is the end of this piece. To reinterpret it again, but then to have some people making sheets for me on occasion. I did have some help for the exhibit, which was wonderful. The woman pulled sheets, and as soon as she pressed them, I was stealing them from her. I mean, I could make 100 sheets of paper in a day.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of my masculine side of my work. And then, I sit there very gingerly like I'm writing thank you notes because I'm, gently manipulating the wet sheet. So there's definitely a combination for me as well. But yeah, a few months a year having somebody come in and pushing that through. So yeah, it's material. I mean, it's still ultimately just material. It's, what you want to do with it. It's where you want to go with it. It's what you want to say with it. Mm-hmm. The fact that I take all this labor to do it is probably the silliest thing I've ever done is to make my own material.
I'd also like to mention that I have a full-time 24-hour assistant. My husband knows how to glaze, how to fire, how to reclaim clay. He has driven me across the country to ship my works. He's in every way my studio partner as well as my life partner, and I couldn't do my work without him.
Well, I think all of you probably need assistance, but I was thinking more in terms of running a production studio,
Yeah.
or not. And I don't mean a production utilitarian object studio, but making additions, something like that. And that brings up Beth Lipman now getting into actually destroying the object after it's been photographed. Does it have to be destroyed to or recycled to finish the piece for you, or is it just a matter of storage?
Nothing ever gets stored. There's certain components that I will incorporate into other compositions, but it's the process of destroying the composition that's the most important thing, and not negating the glass, but also not allowing you to own or consume that material, that it becomes a representation of the material.
I noticed that the photograph that you showed, you mentioned the fact that it was overexposed or washed out. Could you talk about that? Is that on purpose?
It's very new. So in about 2 years, I'll get right back to you. But I guess what I'm trying to do right now, and this is just the beginning of this series, is I'm trying to kind of create a space that does not relate to anything around it. So it's almost like an ideal space, if you will. So, and then I'm also thinking about white is a color that is pure, but it also represents death. And so I'm trying to almost get a ghostly image in some ways, or make the glass disappear into space. These are just things I'm thinking about now.
When it's overexposed like that, really all you're left with are the reflections, which
And the
is an
line,
interesting
the
idea.
two-dimensional line is really important right now.
So it goes back to being a two-dimensional
And I'm
object.
looking at the three-dimensional becomes a vehicle to look at two-dimensional while I'm composing three-dimensionally, and that's really fascinating to me right now.
I hate to cut this off because this is actually the best part of the whole thing, but just in lieu of time, in fact, I think I'm going to have to cut the question and answer at the end and invite everyone to approach the artist at the reception afterwards and talk to them, because everyone has stayed later. There's a short commercial which I'm happy to invite someone up from the Women's Committee who's going to tell you about the craft show that's coming up. Thank you.
Hi, I won't keep you but a moment. I'm Nancy Newkirk. I'm a member of the Smithsonian Women's Committee, and I do want to do a commercial both about the craft show, but also I have an unbelievable opportunity for you for $5 a ticket or $25 for 6 tickets. You have an opportunity to own an original work by basket maker Billy Ruth Sudeth entitled, sorry, I can't read in the light there, Fibonacci 21. It's valued at $10,000, and as I said, I am happy to offer you tickets at $5 a ticket or 6 tickets for $25. We also want to invite you to come and enjoy the Smithsonian Craft Show. Preview night is April 18th from 6:30 to 8:30. The show itself opens the next day, April 19th through 22nd, and you can go to the website www.smithsoniancraftshow.org to get the exact times. Basically, they run all day, but the times vary slightly. And you don't have to be at the craft show the day of the drawing, which is the last day. So I'll hang around. If anybody's interested in tickets, please come on up. Thank you.
And again, I'd like to say thank you to Susanne Frantz for coming for the round table and her contribution in the catalog that's available in our museum shop here. Suzanne.
Thank you very much.
And to thank the 4 artists and for all of you for coming, and I hope you'll take this opportunity to rain questions on them and enjoy the reception in the back. Thank you so much for coming.